Hi, kids. Today we are going to be moving into our second article that we read. We read "The City of Big Shoulders" yesterday. Today we are going to be reading one that is entitled "Ain't Misbehavin'," which is the title of a jazz song that was really big at the time. Um, and it's going to talk kind of about what was the city of Chicago like when the World War One came to an end, when everybody came back home, and kind of what was business like, what was government like, people wanted jobs, what was that environment like, um, and this is kind of this is sort of what people's regular lives were like. So as we take a look at it, the first thing that you see is a kind of a rare photo of the Chicago skyline in the 1920s taken at night, which back then there weren't very many photos that were taken at night because they would get very blurry very quickly because of the way cameras were made in the at that time. So this is kind of rare to see something like this. So let's take a look at it. It's titled "When the Boys Came Home." Like all other American cities, Chicago was overjoyed when World War One came to an end. At the time, people believed that the world had finally been made safe for democracy and a new era of peace and prosperity was about to begin. Chicagoans figured they were finally going to get the opportunity to live a life free of danger, war, and oppression. Veterans returned home hoping to get jobs and start building peacetime lives. They found, though, that most jobs available involved long working hours, unsafe conditions, and very little pay. After their experiences fighting in France, they were no longer willing to sit back and accept poor working conditions. American workers began organizing into unions as never before to demand better pay and conditions. The city also failed to provide equal opportunities for all. African American veterans demanded greater civil rights after fighting for the American way of life, but still often met with racism and prejudice. Labor unions such as the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, and the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, nicknamed Wobblies in Chicago, agitated for their members, calling for strikes when their demands were not met. Given that the revolution in Russia had begun that way only a couple of years earlier, many in government and business were alarmed by the actions of the unions and cracked down hard on any signs of unionization from their workers. They appealed to their workers' patriotism, warning that unions wanted to create a Soviet system like that in Russia. If that appeal did not work, business leaders hired sluggers, who were often criminals, to disrupt workers' meetings and strikes with violence. These struggles between organized labor and business leadership led to a Red Scare when America was consumed with a fear of a possible communist revolution from the working classes, like what happened in Russia. There is little evidence that typical American workers ever wanted to create a Soviet system, but the climate of fear kept big business in control. And this was kind of a very familiar uh, kind of thing that we even see going on even today. This idea that workers' rights will immediately lead to socialism and communism, and there's a big divide in our country as to whether or not that's true. Some people believe it wholeheartedly. Others say no. Workers having the opportunity to have a normal working life is not socialism or communism. It's just a decent life. Okay, moving on. Welcome to the machine. Big cities have often been places of corruption where politicians take money to ignore crimes or abuses of public trust. Chicago's always had more than its share of corruption, mostly due to how quickly the city grew in the 19th century. Much of the corruption took hold because government was very unorganized as the city grew by leaps and bounds. Big businesses donated money to politicians to get them elected, where in turn, the elected officials made laws that were friendly to big businesses, such as low tax rates and loose regulations regarding worker pay or safety. Organized crime also bribed officials and police to ignore their activities in gambling and prostitution. This created a triangle of corruption in Chicago that saw elected government officials get rich by allowing big business and organized crime to operate with no controls. Business and organized crime saw to it that politicians friendly to them stayed in office by either bribing or intimidating voters on election day. This became known as machine politics or the graft system. The system survived because everyone involved got something they wanted. Politicians received bribes, which made them wealthy. They also controlled thousands of city jobs, which they could give to regular people who supported them and would keep them in power. Organized crime was happy because they were allowed to operate more or less openly with little fear of being caught for their illegal activities. Big business leaders were happy because they kept costs down, which allowed them to make more profit. Regular people got access to city jobs and popular illegal activities such as gambling, as long as they cooperated and went along with the machine. And in those days, gambling was pretty much illegal just about everywhere you went. It's not the case today. As the power of the political machine increased dramatically in 1920 when the 18th Amendment went into effect. The 18th Amendment made the sale or manufacture of alcohol illegal in the United States. This created the period of time known as Prohibition. However, a huge majority of Chicagoans, as much as 85%, did not support making alcohol illegal. Since they could no longer buy beer, wine, or whiskey legally, they turned to illegal sources for it. Organized crime happily added bootlegging or illegally smuggling alcohol into the country to their activities. Since so many more Chicagoans were willing to buy illegal liquor than were interested in gambling or prostitution, enormous amounts of money fell into organized crime's lap. This gave them more money to bribe politicians and strengthen the machine even more. As the 1920s began, the city of Chicago was firmly in the grip of corrupt politicians, bootlegging criminals, and unethical businessmen. So as we see that kind of finish, big business was in control. They were bribing the government, who made sure that they kept the rules that needed to be there. Criminals were able to operate that way as well, and so Chicago was a very corrupt sort of place that kind of left criminals to operate openly, and business leaders could pretty much do whatever they wanted as long as they kept contributing to politicians' campaigns. And it continued on after that. The machines have weakened greatly over the century, but there's still remnants of it here and there. So that's something that you still see in Chicago to a lesser extent, big time, a lesser extent today. But there's still elements of it that are there.